The hallway was silent. A single metal door stood at the end of the corridor. Behind that door, a man sat in a small gray room, waiting for the final order. Inside one of China's most guarded prison wings, the last hours of a death row inmate had begun. But something unexpected had just happened. A prison officer walked quickly down the corridor, holding a document in his hand. The paper carried an official seal. The man inside the cell did not know it yet, but the paper contained a decision that would change everything, and the guards were about to read it. The story begins many years earlier, far from the prison walls. In a crowded city in eastern China, the streets were always busy. Buses roared past small food shops. Vendors shouted to sell dumplings and noodles. Motorbikes moved between cars in tight spaces. Among the millions of people living in the city was a man named Li Wei. Li Wei was quiet. People who knew him said he rarely spoke much. He worked long hours at a small repair shop that fixed broken electronics, phones, radios, old televisions. Every morning, he opened the metal gate of the shop and sat behind a wooden table covered in wires and tools. Customers came and went. Some stayed to talk, but Li Wei usually kept working with his head down. He lived alone in a small apartment above the shop. The room was simple: a bed, a small stove, and a window looking down at the street. From the outside, his life seemed ordinary. No one imagined his name would one day appear in newspapers across the country. One night, everything changed. It was late autumn. The streets were quieter than usual because heavy rain was falling across the city. A small convenience store near Li Wei's shop stayed open late. The owner, an older man named Chen Rong, had worked there for almost 20 years. Customers trusted him. Students often stopped there to buy snacks after school. Taxi drivers came in during the night to buy tea. Chen Rong locked the door shortly after midnight. But the next morning, something strange happened. The door of the shop was open. Lights inside were still on, and Chen Rong was gone. At first, people believed he had simply left early. But hours passed. Then the police arrived. Inside the shop, investigators found signs that something had gone wrong during the night. Shelves had been knocked over. The cash register was empty. The small security camera had been broken. But the most worrying detail was something else. There was no sign of Chen Rong anywhere. His phone had been left behind. His keys were still inside the store, and no one had seen him leave. The disappearance shocked the neighborhood. For days, police searched the area. They questioned customers. They checked nearby cameras. Slowly, a timeline began to form. The last person seen near the shop that night was a man walking through the rain. A man wearing a dark jacket. The camera image was blurry, but investigators noticed something important. The man stopped outside the convenience store just minutes before closing. Then he disappeared from the camera view. Police continued searching through hours of footage. Finally, another camera captured the same man walking down a nearby street. He passed under a streetlight, and for a moment, his face became visible. Investigators recognized him almost immediately. It was Li Wei. Police visited his repair shop the next morning. The metal gate was closed, but when they knocked, Li Wei opened the door calmly. Officers asked him questions. Where had he been the night before? Had he visited the convenience store? Li Wei answered quietly. Yes, he said. He had gone there to buy cigarettes, but he insisted he left soon after. He said Chen Rong was still inside the shop when he walked away. At first, there was not enough evidence to arrest him, but the investigation continued, and then police made a discovery that changed the entire case. 3 days later, officers searched a construction site several blocks away. Workers had reported something strange near a pile of building materials. Hidden behind the concrete blocks was something wrapped in plastic. When investigators opened the plastic, they found the missing shop owner, Chen Rong. The news spread across the city within hours. Now, the case had become something much more serious. Police returned to Li Wei's shop. This time, they brought a warrant. Inside the small apartment above the store, investigators searched every corner. At first, they found nothing unusual. But then one officer opened a drawer near the bed. Inside were several items that raised immediate questions. A large amount of cash, clothing that appeared to be recently washed, and something else. A receipt from the convenience store, dated the same night Chen Rong disappeared. Police brought Li Wei in for questioning again. This time, the interview lasted hours. Investigators showed him the evidence, the camera footage, the receipt, the timeline of events. At first, Li Wei repeated the same story. He said he had simply bought cigarettes and left. But as the hours passed, the pressure grew. Finally, late that night, Li Wei lowered his head, and he began to talk. His confession shocked the investigators. According to Li Wei, the visit to the shop had started as something small. He needed money. Business at the repair shop had been slow. He had debts he could not pay. When he entered the store that night, he said, he noticed the owner was alone, and the cash register was open. What happened next would later be described in court documents as a robbery that turned into a tragic crime. The confession ended the mystery of Chen Rong's disappearance, but it also started a long legal process, a trial, a sentence, and eventually, death row. Years later, Li Wei sat alone inside a prison cell. The walls were gray. The window was small and covered with metal bars. In China's prison system, inmates sentenced to death are often placed in special detention wings. These areas are heavily guarded. The routine is strict. Every movement is controlled. Every day follows the same schedule. But when the final court review is completed, everything changes. Because once the order arrives, the final hours begin. And now, after years of waiting, that moment had come. Back in the quiet prison corridor, the officer holding the official document stopped outside Li Wei's cell. Two guards stood beside him. The man inside the cell slowly looked up. The officer unfolded the paper. Then he spoke. The final review of Li Wei's case had just been completed. The highest court had made its decision, and the words written on that document meant only one thing. Li Wei would not be leaving death row alive. But before the guards could finish reading the order, something unexpected happened. Li Wei said something that made everyone in the hallway freeze. A sentence no one expected to hear. A sentence that raised a terrifying new question about the entire case. And suddenly, the story everyone believed might not be the full truth, after all. The hallway went silent. The guards looked at each other. They had heard many last statements from prisoners over the years. Some cried. Some stayed quiet. Some asked to see their families. But the words Li Wei had just spoken were different. He looked directly at the officer holding the document. His voice was calm. "There is something you don't know," he said. The officer frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked. Li Wei did not answer right away. He slowly stood up from the metal bed in the corner of his cell. For a moment, no one moved. The guards watched him carefully. Then Li Wei spoke again. "The story you believe. It's not the whole story." The officer lowered the paper slightly. "What are you talking about?" he said. Li Wei walked closer to the bars of his cell. His face looked tired after years inside prison walls. "The robbery happened," he said quietly. "But there was someone else there that night." The guards stared at him. For years, the case had been considered closed. The confession, the evidence, the trial, everything pointed to Li Wei acting alone. But now, just hours before his scheduled execution, he was saying something completely different. The officer stepped closer to the cell. "Why didn't you say this before?" he asked. Li Wei gave a small, strange smile. Because no one asked the right questions, the officer immediately contacted the prison supervisor. Within minutes, the small prison office became busy. Phones rang. Officials spoke in low voices. In the Chinese justice system, once the highest court confirms a death sentence, it is rarely changed. But a last-minute claim like this could not be ignored. Not without checking. Soon, two investigators arrived at the prison. They carried files filled with documents from the original case. Photographs, interview transcripts, court records. They sat across from Li Wei inside a small interview room. A camera recorded everything. One investigator opened the file. "Li Wei," he said calmly, "your confession was clear. You said you acted alone." Li Wei nodded. "Yes. Now, you're saying someone else was involved?" Li Wei looked down at the table. Then he nodded again. "Yes." The investigators waited. Finally, one of them asked the question everyone wanted answered. Li Wei looked up slowly. "The man who gave me the idea, The room grew quiet. "What man?" the investigator asked. Li Wei leaned back in his chair. "A man who used to come to my shop," he said. "He repaired phones sometimes, but he also asked strange questions." The investigator flipped through the file. "Why didn't you mention him during the trial?" Li Wei sighed. "Because he disappeared," Li Wei began explaining. "Months before the robbery, a regular customer started visiting the repair shop. His name was Jiang Min. At least, that was the name he used. He was friendly at first. He talked a lot. He liked asking questions about business, about money, about the neighborhood. At first, Li Wei thought nothing of it. Customers talked all the time, but over the weeks, Jiang Min began saying strange things. He complained about money problems. He joked about how easy it would be to rob small stores. One day, he even mentioned Chen Rong's convenience store. He closes late, Jiang Min said during one visit. He must keep a lot of cash. Li Wei said he laughed at the time. He thought it was just talk. But Jiang Min kept bringing it up, again and again, until the idea stopped sounding like a joke. The investigators listened carefully. One of them pulled out an old photograph from the case file. It showed the convenience store. "Did Jiang Min go there with you?" the investigator asked. Li Wei shook his head. "No." "Then what happened?" Li Wei paused for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "The night of the robbery, he was waiting outside." The investigators looked at each other. This detail had never appeared in the original investigation. Li Wei continued. "He said Jiang Min had been standing near the corner of the street that night, hidden from the store camera, watching." According to Li Wei, the plan had been simple. He would enter the store, take the money, leave quickly. But inside the shop, things went wrong. Chen Rong tried to stop him. There was a struggle, and in that moment, everything changed. When Li Wei ran outside, Jiang Min was gone, vanished. He never saw him again. The investigators checked their files again. The original case had included dozens of witness interviews, but none mentioned a man named Jiang Min. Still, the possibility bothered them. "What did he look like?" one investigator asked. Li Wei described him carefully. "Medium height, short black hair, a small scar above his left eyebrow, always wearing a gray jacket." The investigators wrote everything down. Then they stopped recording. Outside the room, they discussed the situation. If Li Wei was telling the truth, the case might have been incomplete, but proving it now would be extremely difficult. The crime had happened years ago. Witnesses had moved away. Memories had faded. Still, they had to check. While investigators worked through the night, Li Wei was returned to his cell. The prison corridor was quiet again. He sat on his bed and stared at the small window high in the wall. Hours passed. Somewhere in the prison, guards changed shifts. Doors opened and closed. But Li Wei remained alone, waiting. Early in the morning, the investigators returned. They had searched old records, police reports, neighborhood interviews, and finally, they found something unexpected. One witness from the original investigation had mentioned seeing a second man near the street corner that night, but the description had been vague, and at the time, police believed the witness might have been mistaken. Now, the details seemed more important. The investigators looked at Li Wei again. "Why tell us this now?" one of them asked. Li Wei answered quietly. "Because if I'm going to die, the truth should not die with me." But there was still a problem. Even if another man existed, Li Wei had already confessed. The court had already ruled. The highest legal review had already been completed, and the execution order had already been delivered to the prison. The law rarely stopped once it reached this point. As the sun began rising outside the prison walls, officials gathered in the main office. They discussed the new claim. They reviewed the case file again. Some believed Li Wei might simply be trying to delay the execution. Others believed the detail about the second man deserved attention. But time was running out. In China's justice system, once the final court decision arrives, the final hours move quickly. Very quickly. Back in his cell, Li Wei sat quietly as footsteps approached again. 3 officers walked toward the door. One carried another document. The lead officer stopped in front of the bars. He looked at Li Wei carefully. Then he spoke. "The court has reviewed the situation." Li Wei slowly stood up. The officer unfolded the document, and then he read the decision, but the words that followed would leave Li Wei staring in disbelief. Because the court had made a decision no one in the room expected. The prison corridor felt colder than before. Li Wei stood quietly inside his cell as the officer finished reading the document. For a moment, no one spoke. The words from the court echoed in the small hallway. The sentence will proceed as scheduled. Li Wei slowly closed his eyes. The investigators had reported his statement about the second man. The court had reviewed the new claim during the night, but the judges decided there was not enough new evidence to reopen the case. The confession still stood, the trial records were still valid, and the final decision had already been confirmed. The execution would move forward. The officer folded the document carefully. The guards remained still. Inside the cell, Li Wei sat back down on the metal bed. His face showed little emotion. Years earlier, the court had already decided his fate. Now, the final hours had truly begun. In China's prison system, death row operates under strict procedures. Once the highest court approves a death sentence, the order is sent directly to the prison. From that moment, the timeline becomes very short. Sometimes only hours. Sometimes a single day. The purpose is to carry out the court's decision quickly and under full supervision. Every step must be recorded. Every movement must follow official rules. Nothing is left to chance. Later that morning, Li Wei was escorted from his cell. Two guards walked beside him as they moved through a long corridor. The prison was quiet. Most inmates never saw the death row wing. It was separated from the rest of the facility by locked doors and security checkpoints. The group stopped inside a small room. This room was used for final meetings. Here, prisoners could speak with officials, legal representatives, or spiritual advisors before the sentence was carried out. Li Wei sat at the table. Across from him sat a prison officer and a legal recorder. The officer spoke calmly. "You may give a final statement if you wish." Li Wei looked at the table for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. "I told you everything I know." The recorder wrote down his words. The officer nodded. "Is there anything you wish to say to your family?" Li Wei shook his head gently. His parents had passed away years earlier. He had no wife, no children. No one was waiting outside the prison gates. Outside the prison, the morning sky had turned bright. Traffic moved along the nearby highway. People walked to work. Children went to school. For most of the city, it was a normal day. Few people knew what was happening behind the prison walls. Inside the death row wing, however, every minute mattered. After the final meeting, Li Wei was escorted again through the corridor. Another room waited at the end. This one is larger, but still simple. Officials were already inside. A doctor, a prison supervisor, two witnesses assigned by the justice system. Every execution required observers to confirm the process followed the law. The supervisor reviewed the official documents once more. He checked the prisoner's identity. He checked the court order. He checked the time. Everything had to match exactly. Li Wei stood quietly while the procedures were explained. The doctor asked a few basic questions. "Do you feel ill?" "No." "Do you understand the court's decision?" Li Wei nodded. "Yes." The doctor recorded the answers. The room remained calm and professional. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. The purpose was not drama. The purpose was procedure. A few minutes later, the prison supervisor stepped forward. He read the official statement confirming the court's decision. The words described the crime, the trial, and the final approval from the country's highest court. The statement ended with a simple line. "The sentence will now be carried out according to the law." Before the procedure began, Li Wei was given one final chance to speak. He looked around the room. For a moment, his eyes stopped on the investigators who had questioned him during the night. Then he spoke. "I told you about the other man," he said quietly. "I hope one day someone finds him." The investigators listened silently. One of them nodded slightly. Even now, the question remained. Was Li Wei telling the truth? Or was it a final attempt to change the story? No one in the room knew for certain, and perhaps they never would. The officials continued with the final steps required by law. The doctor observed carefully. The witnesses watched. The recorder documented everything. After the procedure was completed, the doctor stepped forward. He performed the final medical check. Then he turned to the supervisor. The official time was recorded. The room remained silent for several seconds. Then the supervisor closed the case file. Outside the prison, news of the execution soon reached local media. Reports described the case briefly: a robbery, a tragic crime, a trial that lasted years, and the final sentence approved by the court. For many readers, it was simply another crime story. But for the investigators who had spoken with Li Wei during his final hours, the case was not so simple. Because one question still remained: who was the mysterious man Li Wei called Jiang Min? Was he real? Was he only a story? Or had someone truly disappeared from the case years ago without anyone noticing? Weeks later, one of the investigators reopened the old case files. He reviewed the witness statements again. He studied the blurry security camera images from the night of the crime. And there, near the corner of the street, he noticed something he had overlooked before: a shadow, a second figure standing just outside the camera's view. The image was unclear, too unclear to prove anything, but clear enough to raise one final question. Perhaps the truth of that rainy night had never been fully discovered, and somewhere out there, a man named Jiang Min might still be walking free, while the only man ever punished for the crime had already taken his final breath inside the quiet walls of a prison. If you found this story compelling, like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more in-depth crime and justice documentaries.